Hello, everybody, and welcome back to day 53 of the Road to 2KonChess.com. Like we discussed yesterday, these next 2 days we're going to finish up with rounds 3 and 4 and then 5 and 6 of the Phoenix Open that we just played here in Phoenix, Arizona. So we're going to jump right in. So in game 3, we were playing Mr. Jaden, who was a 1543, and we are sitting at 1600 with the black pieces. Our opponent played e4, at which point we had prepped c6, d4, d5, e takes, c takes, bishop d3 again, knight to f6, and then bishop to f4, immediately kind of throwing us off in the position. Now, bishop to f4 is always kind of an interesting move because it does weaken the b2 square in a lot of these positions. And I wasn't quite sure about what I wanted to do here. And after a little bit of thought, I ended up playing knight to c6, just developing a knight. My opponent played c3, which is the most principled approach, creating this pawn chain here, defending the d4 square. I played bishop to g4, defended by the knight, attacking the queen, and kind of asking it what it wanted to do. My opponent plays queen to b3, which I expected, and queen to d7 was kind of my last line of prep, as I knew that queen d7 is one of the critical moves to defend the b7 pawn. Now, the engine also suggests that you can play knight to a5. However, after a move like queen to b5, pardon me, queen to a4, knight c6, and bishop b5, it's kind of an uncomfortable position, although the engine argues that black has completely equalized here. So queen to d7 defends the pawn, knight to d2. At this point, I played e6 because my light square bishop is out of the pawn chain. My opponent plays knight g to f3. And at this point, I played bishop captures f3, and I am already an hour down on the clock once again. Now, my rationale behind bishop captures f3 is that my opponent, and one of the ideas for white in the Caro, is to play the knight to e5, at which point it's exerting a lot of pressure on my position, and with the way that I developed, this knight on f6 is kind of trapped. There's no good retreating squares for it. You could argue that these squares are not good for the knight either. Putting the knight to the rim is dim, and then knight to g8 obviously puts the knight back on the starting square. So I was trying to avoid complications by trading off one of the knights, was really my biggest idea here. So my opponent plays knight captures f3, at which point I played the move that I had planned out, knight to h5, which gives the second best line of the engine. My opponent played bishop to g3. I played knight captures g3, and here I was fully expecting my opponent was going to play h captures g3 because this pressure looks really, really good for white. So I was a little bit struck when my opponent ended up playing f captures g3 instead, with I think the primary idea that when they castle, their rook is going to see down on the f7 square and is going to give them a little bit more activity towards my king. So after evaluating the position for a little bit, trying to figure out where the threats were, I played bishop to d6, developing my final minor piece. My opponent castled as I expected, and here I went ahead and I played h6 first. Now, h6 is a little bit of a slow move. The engine's best line is actually just to castle into this, which felt a little bit scary. I was afraid that if castles, my opponent has ideas like knight to g5, at which point the engine says, quit being silly, play g6, and play on. But it just felt quite uncomfortable to me. So h6, the whole idea was to stop the knight coming into g5. My opponent in this point played rook a to e1. And in this position, I looked at long castles for 10 minutes. I looked at castles for that 10 minutes. And because I didn't like that the c file was open, I ended up going with castles and putting my rook on the same file as his rook. Now, the engine evaluation is not significantly different in this position, one versus the other. This is kind of the way I prefer to play the position. And in the Caro-Kann, you very rarely play long castles. So that was kind of my other rationale behind playing this move. Here, my opponent played bishop to b1, and I played rook a to e8, trying to solidify. Now, if we take a half step back, bishop to b1, the very clear follow-up is queen to d2, targeting the h7 square. Because I didn't see that it's an immediate threat and that I have moves that are going to defend, I wasn't super worried about it. So rook a to e8. My calculation was right with queen to c2. And I play the move g6. The g6 blunts this battery. I'm going to have ideas like queen to g7, or sorry, king to g7, and then maybe f5 and e5 in the future. Here, my opponent played queen to d2, putting pressure onto the h6 pawn, at which point I played king to g7, stepping in front of it, and really just letting the king be an active defender, and there's no easy way to attack black's position here. My opponent played rook e2, looking to double their rooks on the file. And at this point, I took quite a long think, and I realized that if I don't do something now, my opponent is going to plant the knight on e5. And that just felt like an incredibly uncomfortable position for me to try and deal with. So not seeing many other options, I took an additional 15 minutes here, and the clock situation is now 1 hour and 5 minutes for my opponent and 35 minutes for me. Is I played e5. Now, e5 is a critical pawn break in many Caro-Kann positions, where after d takes, I opted to go with knight captures e5, and knight captures e5, rook captures e5, defending the d pawn and attacking his rook, rook captures e5, and finally, bishop captures e5. So we traded all this material down. I've gotten rid of a lot of the center situation, and in this endgame, I started to feel like it was turning with me having the advantage over my opponent. So now it's a matter of can we solidify and can we actually get a win in this. So my opponent played rook to d1, putting 2 attackers on this pawn. I played rook to d8, defending it adequately. My opponent played queen to d3. And a really unfortunate miss of mine here is I was looking at moves like queen to c6. I was looking at moves like queen to c7, really anything to get my queen onto a more active square than it's currently sitting on d6. The reason I discarded these moves is I was so worried about queen takes d5. But in a position like this, if my opponent takes, I take back with the rook, and everything is fine. So it's completely on me that I just wasn't seeing that. So instead, I played d4, which immediately loses any advantage I just built up because there's not a great prospect for this pawn to continue to push forward into the position. My opponent played bishop to c2 after some thought, so now the situation is 50 minutes and 18 seconds to 23 minutes. I played b5, trying to restrict their pawn play on this side and also restricting their queen's activity on the queen side. My opponent played rook to d2, and after the game, what I started to notice is that my opponent's moves have really been doing nothing. My opponent is shuffling their pieces. They haven't quite found a way through, and I think that if I would have identified that during the game, I would have had a little bit more confidence to play this on. However, I didn't see it. I didn't see a way through, so I played bishop to f6, which is best, h4, and here I stopped their pawns with h5. Now, the engine says that I should have played a move like queen to, not queen to c8, which is also technically fine, but queen to c7, targeting this weakened g3 pawn, and allow the push to come through. However, with my opponent having this lingering battery towards h7, I was a little bit hesitant to allow it through. So I played h5 to stop any pawn pushes. My opponent played rook to d1. I played queen to d5. After b3, queen to c5. You can already see the engine evaluation has greatly shifted in favor of black because this pawn is getting stronger and stronger and stronger as time is moving on. My opponent played c4, and at which point I was supposed to play a move like rook to e8. And if they were to, let's say, take c captures, the rook is going to storm up to e3, displacing the queen. The queen has to go to, c4, at which point you can play a move like queen to e5, get off the diagonal. This is coming in. This pawn's going to start pushing, and it's a very scary position for white to defend. However, I took the pawn. They took with the queen, and wanting to avoid the complications, feeling like I wasn't much better out of the opening, I took the queen and lost the entire advantage, which is really just unfortunate. So my opponent plays b captures c. I played rook to d7, defending the 7th rank, trying to hold on to my pawns. At this point, my opponent played rook to d3. And a little bit of a spoiler alert here is my opponent offered a draw with 43 minutes on the clock to my 20 minutes and 54 seconds. And my thought process was as follows: is in this position, we both have a passed pawn on the D and the C file. We have opposite colored bishops, and the pawns are technically equal, but my opponent has these double G pawns, and their pawns are stopped essentially by my pawns. So I felt like I was in a slightly better position and that this was a 2-result game. Now, what I struggled to see here and what I was taking all that time to calculate was, how do I actually push the advantage here? As I was looking at moves like bishop to e7, and if my opponent were to, I don't know, play king to f2, bringing their king to the defense of this pawn, I can play bishop to c5, holding on to it. My opponent can continue to push up in the position, at which point I probably play rook to e7 to stop them from coming any further in. If my opponent plays a move like bishop to d1, apparently f5 is the way to go and to start pushing all these kingside pawns. I would have also been looking at moves like rook e3 check, where if rook takes, pawn takes, and now this pawn is close to the center. The other variation I was stuck on for a long time was a move like bishop to e5, where it can't be displaced by a piece. After king to f2, moves like f6 maybe hold everything together, and then my pawn is going to be, or my king is going to try and run into the position. However, I was getting tired. It was the morning game, and after thinking for so long, 15 minutes until I was down about 40 minutes on the clock, I put out my hand. I told my opponent I accept his draw. We move to 2 out of 3 on the tournament, and we go into the 4th game. Now, in game 4, we played Miss Harshitha, who is a 1678, and I have played this gal in the past. She is quite a strong player, so a ton of credit to her, and I did get the white pieces in this game. So I played e4, and immediately she catches me off guard with d5. Now, d5, Scandinavian defense, is, unfortunately, I did not do a ton of opening prep leading into this tournament. And you're going to see this trend kind of follow through, where I was struggling a lot with my time management and with my openings, but I was ending up in a lot of really good positions here. Is after e captures d5, queen captures d5, knight c3, queen a5, d4, knight f6. This is kind of where I fell out of theory and I didn't fully know what the best move was, but I played knight to f3 pretty casually. c6 creates an escape square for the queen to run. And here I played h3. Now, a lot of times in openings, playing moves like h3 and a3 are wrong because they're not active enough, they're not developing their pieces. However, because my opponent opted to play c6, instead of a move like bishop to g4, which I've seen in a few lines, I played h3 as a prophylactic move to stop either the knight or the bishop from coming to the square. Now here, my opponent played knight to b to d7, which I thought was a little bit of a weird move. So I took about 10 minutes here, looking at moves like bishop to e3, looking at moves like g4, bishop c4, and ultimately I played the move bishop to d3. My opponent played e6. Now here, I could have castled. However, I didn't particularly love the idea of castling because I'd already pushed this h-pawn, and I was a little bit worried about it becoming a hook. So instead, I played bishop to d2. My opponent plays queen to c7, getting out of the scope of this dark square bishop. I played queen to e2, not seeing many other moves for myself. My opponent plays bishop to d6, creating this battery towards the king side. And with bishop to d6, what this signaled to me is that my opponent is going to try and attack on the king side. So as a result, I played the move long castle, which is the best move, or the second best move in the position. Knight to b6, I kind of expected. Now, in a lot of these positions, when you see a knight come to the rim, a lot of times what you can do is you can play moves like a4 or h4. But because I had already castled my king to the queen side, I was a little bit hesitant to push my pawns that early. Instead, I played the move rook h to e1, activating my final piece that hasn't been put on a good square yet. My opponent played bishop to d7. And at this point, I am already down about 20 minutes on the clock. It's 58:54 to 1 minute and 16 seconds. In here, knowing very little about the Scandinavian, I know just enough that a critical move in a lot of these positions is the move knight to e5, which did end up being the best move in the position. Now, I got here and I stopped and did some more calculation. I figured that my knight is better than her bishop. And really, I like my position because all my pieces are serving a defensive purpose, but very quickly are going to be able to get out into the position and exert some serious pressure here. Now, my opponent, after quite some thought, played rook to f8, and I think that her idea was if she were to long castle here, the critical move is knight captures f7, winning a pawn and threatening a fork of the rooks, as well as if she castles short, which is best, then moves like g4 are coming in, where you're going to start storming down on the king side. So rook f8 is kind of a prophylactic move to defend the f-pawn. I played g4 here, starting to attack her knight after approximately another 10 minutes of thought. My opponent played h6 to stop g5, so instead of pushing g5 and just blundering a pawn, I took a breath here. I said, I am attacking, and I went for the move f4, which is the best move in the position, and we're starting to see that advantage build. So here, my opponent long castled, and I realized that we were going to have a very odd positional game where I don't have many positions where the kings are simultaneously long castled. So here, I played the move h4, trying to prepare g5 and prevent her from playing g5 herself. She played knight f to d5, and this is probably the biggest misstep of the tournament. Is like we talked about earlier, is I evaluated that my knight on e4 is significantly stronger than her light squared bishop in this position because the light squared bishop has no prospects of getting out. However, I panicked at the board. I thought I saw a tactical motif, and I played queen captures d7, which immediately loses any advantage. The engine evaluation goes straight back to zeros. But my idea here was that if my opponent were to play knight captures c3, which I thought the idea of knight f to d5 was, instead of taking back immediately, what you do is you play knight captures b6 check. After a captures b6, then and only then do you take back the knight, and you're up a pawn because you had that intermezzo check. My opponent was smarter than that and punished me for playing hope chess. If she plays knight captures d7, I played knight captures d5, trading off the knights. She played e captures d5. And here, I thought about trying to goad her into playing either one of the rooks in the middle with a move like king to b1, because if she was to play something like rook f to e8, you take that rook and you immediately come down the file where she's going to lose a substantial amount of material and you're up a rook in the endgame. So ultimately, I played queen to f3, defending the f-pawn because there was a bishop and the queen battery staring on this piece. My opponent played king to b8 after a little bit of thought, and after about another 10 minutes, so now the time situation is 33:18 to 54:07, I played the move king to b1 and offered a draw. It was the evening game of day 2, and I was getting pretty tired because I had burnt all my clock in all 4 games so far. Now this game, I only 30 minutes, so I'd only burnt an hour on my clock. But 4 games in, I just didn't see a way to advance in this position. I felt like I had a slight advantage. However, in regards to how to prove this, I wasn't quite sure, and I wasn't really feeling like risking it when I was already getting so tired. So it was a little bit more of a tactical decision to offer that draw. What I should have done here is, so here it already says that our opponent can play rook f to e8 or rook h to e8, at which point, it's saying play in rook h8, at which point you can play moves like g5 immediately and try and push the advantage down this queen side or king side. I didn't see it. I was getting tired. And on that note, we moved to 2.5 out of 4 through 2 days at the Phoenix Open. And going into day 3, our whole goal is going to be to try and finish the tournament strong, pick up a few wins, and hopefully pick up a few rating points. So if you guys have any comments on how I played or comments on how I can continue to improve, leave it on down below. If you enjoyed this recap, hit the like button. And then finally, check below, make sure that you're still subscribed or are subscribed. And if you are not, hit that button. It does help you to make sure that you don't miss any of my future content. And on that note, I will see you guys on the next day.